The helicopter blades thundered overhead as 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt outside Kofi's humble mud-brick home. Dust clouds swirled around the vehicles as men in expensive suits stepped out, their eyes scanning the small farming compound with laser precision. At the center of it all stood a tall, imposing figure whose presence commanded immediate attention. Marcus Wellington, one of Africa's wealthiest businessmen, his face etched with a mixture of desperation and hope that had consumed him for the past 3 years. "Are you certain this is the place?" Marcus's voice cut through the evening air like a blade, his expensive Italian shoes crunching against the red earth as he approached the simple dwelling where lamplight flickered through small windows. His security chief, a stern man named Samuel, checked his tablet one final time before nodding grimly. "The DNA results are conclusive, sir. The children are here." Inside the small house, 62-year-old Kofi Asante froze as he heard voices outside. His weathered hands trembled as he set down the wooden bowl he'd been carving, his mind racing with confusion and fear. Through the window, he could see the expensive cars and well-dressed strangers gathering like storm clouds around his modest home. In the back room, he could hear the soft laughter of Amma, Kwame, and Akojua, the 3 beautiful children he'd found abandoned by the riverside 3 years ago, the same children who had brought joy and purpose back into his lonely life. What Kofi didn't know was that these weren't just any children. They were the missing heirs to a billion-dollar empire, and their discovery was about to turn his simple farming life completely upside down. Marcus Wellington had spent every waking moment of the past 3 years searching for his missing grandchildren. After his son David and daughter-in-law Grace died in that terrible car accident, the triplets had mysteriously vanished from the scene. The police had found no trace of them, no witnesses, no clues. It was as if they had simply disappeared into thin air. But Marcus never gave up hope. He'd hired the best private investigators money could buy, offered massive rewards, and followed every lead, no matter how small. Now, standing outside this humble farmer's home in the remote village of Akros, Marcus felt his heart pounding with the same intensity it had on the day he'd first held his grandchildren as babies. The private investigator had finally traced them here through a series of small-town gossip networks and careful detective work. A kind farmer named Kofi had been seen caring for 3 children who matched the exact description of his missing grandchildren. "Sir," Samuel approached cautiously, "perhaps we should call ahead to the local authorities to handle this delicately. The man might not understand." "No." Marcus's voice was firm as steel. "I've waited 3 years to find them. I'm not waiting another minute." As the wealthy businessman strode toward the front door, Kofi's heart raced with panic. He had no idea what these strangers wanted, but their presence felt ominous. His mind immediately went to the children sleeping peacefully in the back room. Ever since he'd found them crying by the riverbank 3 years ago, weak and alone, he'd protected them as if they were his own blood. The authorities had never come looking for them, despite his efforts to report their discovery. Eventually, he'd simply accepted them as a blessing from the ancestors and raised them with all the love in his weathered heart. The knock on his wooden door echoed through the small house like thunder. "Open up, please. We need to speak with you about the children." Marcus's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Kofi's hands shook as he approached the door. Through the gaps in the wood, he could see shadows moving outside. His mind raced with possibilities. Were these government officials? Police? Had he done something wrong by caring for the children? The thought of losing Amma, Kwame, and Akojua made his chest tighten with fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" Kofi called through the door, his voice barely steady. "My name is Marcus Wellington. I believe you have my grandchildren." The words hit Kofi like a lightning bolt. Grandchildren? These children had grandparents? Living family members who had been searching for them? His mind reeled with the implications. If what this man said was true, then everything was about to change forever. With trembling fingers, Kofi slowly unlatched the wooden door. As it creaked open, he found himself face to face with Marcus Wellington, a man whose expensive clothes and commanding presence seemed to belong to an entirely different world than the simple farming village of Akros. Marcus studied Kofi's weathered face intently, searching for any sign of deception or malice. Instead, he saw only confusion, fear, and something else that caught him off guard: genuine love and concern for the children. "The children," Marcus said quietly, his voice suddenly vulnerable despite his imposing presence. "Ama, Kwame, and Akojua. Are they safe? Are they here?" Kofi's eyes widened in shock. This stranger knew their names. The same names he had given them when he'd found them, names that honored his own deceased parents and sister. How was that possible? "How do you know their names?" Kofi whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own heartbeat. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, slightly crumpled from being carried everywhere for 3 years. It showed 3 beautiful toddlers playing in an elaborate garden, their faces bright with innocent laughter. Even in the dim light, Kofi could see the unmistakable resemblance to the children sleeping in his back room. "Because I named them myself," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "The day they were born. My son David and his wife Grace died in a car accident 3 years ago, and these children disappeared that same night. I've been searching for them ever since." The photograph trembled in Kofi's hands as the full weight of the situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. These weren't orphaned children abandoned by heartless parents. They were the beloved grandchildren of one of the wealthiest men in West Africa, children who had been missing for 3 years, children whose grandfather had never stopped looking for them. "I found them by the river," Kofi said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "They were crying, so small and frightened. I waited for someone to come looking for them, but no one ever did. I reported it to the local police, but they said they had no missing children reports. I thought they had no one." Marcus felt his knees weaken as the realization hit him. This humble farmer had saved his grandchildren's lives. While Marcus had been searching in cities and following false leads among the wealthy and powerful, his precious grandchildren had been here all along, safe in the care of a man who had nothing but had given them everything. "Can I see them?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper now. "Please. I've been dreaming of this moment for 3 years." Kofi nodded slowly and gestured for Marcus to follow him toward the back of the house. As they walked through the simple rooms filled with handmade furniture and the warm scent of wood smoke, Marcus saw evidence everywhere of a life lived simply but with great care. Children's drawings were stuck to the walls with palm sap, small wooden toys sat in corners, and 3 small sleeping mats were arranged neatly near the back window. But it was the sound of soft, peaceful breathing that made Marcus stop dead in his tracks. There, sleeping peacefully on their mats, were Ama, Kwame, and Akojua. They had grown so much in 3 years, but Marcus would have recognized them anywhere. Ama still slept curled in a tight ball just like she had as a baby. Kwame had his thumb in his mouth, a habit he'd never outgrown. And little Akojua was sprawled out with her arms wide, claiming as much space as her small body could manage. Marcus fell to his knees beside their sleeping forms, tears streaming down his face as he whispered their names. "Ama, Kwame, Akojua. Grandfather's here. Grandfather's finally here." But as the children began to stir at the sound of unfamiliar voices, Kofi's heart broke into a million pieces. These children didn't know Marcus. To them, this imposing stranger was exactly that, a stranger. And Kofi was the only father they had ever really known. What happened next would change all of their lives forever, but not in the way anyone could have expected. 5-year-old Ama was the first to open her eyes, blinking sleepily in the dim lamplight. When she saw the tall stranger kneeling beside her mat with tears streaming down his face, she instinctively scooted backward until she bumped into Kwame, who was just beginning to wake up. The movement stirred little Akojua, who sat up rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. "Papa, Kofi?" Ama's voice was small and uncertain as she looked past the crying stranger to find her beloved caretaker. "Who is this man? Why is he crying?" Kofi's heart shattered at the innocent question. These children had never known any parent but him, had never called anyone else Papa. The love in Ama's voice when she said his name was both the most beautiful and most painful sound he'd ever heard, because he knew it might be one of the last times he'd hear it. Marcus wiped his eyes quickly, trying to compose himself, but his hands were shaking with emotion. "Hello, children. My name is Marcus. I'm your grandfather." The 3 children huddled closer together, clearly confused and frightened by this stranger's presence. Kwame, always the protective one despite being the same age as his sisters, moved in front of Ama and Akojua with his small arms spread wide. "We don't have a grandfather," Kwame declared with a fierce certainty that only a 5-year-old could possess. Papa Kofi takes care of us. We don't need anyone else. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His own grandchildren didn't know him, didn't want him, saw him as a threat to the only security they'd ever known. But as much as it hurt, Marcus could see the love and loyalty these children had for Kofi, and despite his pain, he felt grateful that they'd been so well cared for. Kofi knelt down beside the children, gathering them close to his weathered frame. "Children, this man says he is your family. Your real family. He says your parents were his son and daughter-in-law, and that they died in an accident 3 years ago. But you're our papa," little Akojua said, her voice trembling as she sensed the adult's distress. "You found us by the river. You saved us." "Yes, little one. I found you by the river, and I have loved you every day since then. But this man, he has been looking for you all this time. He never stopped searching because he loves you too." Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Kofi could have lied, could have hidden the children or claimed they weren't the ones he was looking for. Instead, this humble farmer was trying to help the children understand a situation that was probably impossible for their young minds to grasp. "Mr. Wellington," Kofi said quietly, "perhaps we should speak outside while the children rest. This is overwhelming for them." Marcus nodded, taking one last long look at his grandchildren before following Kofi back to the main room. Outside, his security team waited patiently by the vehicles, though Marcus could see the tension in their postures. This wasn't how any of them had imagined this moment would unfold. "Tell me about them," Marcus said once they were out of the children's earshot. "Tell me about their lives here. Are they healthy? Happy? Do they go to school?" Kofi's face softened as he thought about the past 3 years. "They are the light of my life, Mr. Wellington. When I found them that night, they were so small, so frightened. They had no words for what happened to them, just tears and nightmares for the first few months. But children are strong. They healed." He gestured around the simple room. "I know this isn't much compared to what you could give them. I'm just a poor farmer with a small plot of cassava and yams. But I've given them all the love in my heart. They help me in the fields during planting season, they play with the other village children, and yes, they go to the small school here in Akros. Amma is already reading better than children twice her age." Marcus absorbed every word, painting a mental picture of his grandchildren's lives in this remote village. It was so different from the world of private tutors, luxury cars, and gated compounds that he had planned for them. Yet as he looked around Kofi's humble home, he saw something he'd lost track of in his own wealthy world: genuine warmth and love. "The night you found them," Marcus said carefully, "do you remember anything else? Any details that might help me understand what happened?" Kofi closed his eyes, remembering that fateful evening. "It was during the rainy season. I was checking my fields because there had been flooding upriver. I heard crying coming from near the old ferry crossing. When I found them, they were huddled under a broken canoe, soaking wet and terrified. They had no shoes, their clothes were torn, and Amma had a small cut on her forehead." Marcus's investigator instincts kicked in. The old ferry crossing was about 15 miles from where the accident had occurred. Someone had taken the children from the crash site and brought them to that remote location. But who? And why abandon them there instead of taking them to safety? Did you see anyone else that night? Any vehicles or people who might have been in the area? "There was a truck," Kofi said slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "An old pickup truck driving away from the direction of the river as I approached. I didn't think much of it at the time. People use that road to transport goods to the market in the next village. But now that I think about it, it was very late for someone to be making deliveries." This new information sent Marcus's mind racing. Someone had deliberately taken his grandchildren from the accident scene and abandoned them by that river. But was it a rescue gone wrong, or something more sinister? Had someone tried to kidnap them for ransom but lost their nerve? Or had there been a good Samaritan who panicked when they realized the magnitude of what they'd gotten involved in? "Mr. Wellington," Kofi said gently, "I can see the wheels turning in your mind. But right now, the most important thing is those 3 children sleeping in the next room. They're confused and scared. Whatever happened that night, Whatever mysteries need solving, those children need stability and love above all else. Marcus nodded, forcing himself to focus on the present rather than the past. You're right, of course. I've been so focused on finding them that I hadn't really thought about what would happen when I actually did. He paused, looking at Kofi with new respect. You love them very much. With all my heart, Kofi admitted. When my wife died 10 years ago, and then my own children moved to the cities for work, I thought my life was over. I was just an old man waiting to join my ancestors. But those 3 children gave me purpose again. They gave me joy. And now I'm here to take that away from you, Marcus said quietly, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. Kofi was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Wellington, those children belong with family. They deserve to know where they came from, to have the opportunities that your wealth can provide. I always knew this day might come, that someone might claim them. I just hoped. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. You hoped they could stay with you forever, Marcus completed gently. Yes, Kofi whispered. Is that selfish of me? Marcus studied this man who had saved his grandchildren's lives and raised them with such obvious devotion. An idea began forming in his mind, but it was so unconventional, so different from anything he'd ever considered before, that he wasn't sure he had the courage to voice it. From the back room came the sound of whispered conversation as the children tried to make sense of what was happening. Their soft voices carried the confusion and fear that any child would feel when their world suddenly shifted beneath their feet. Papa Kofi, came Amma's small voice. Is the man going to take us away from you? The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and both men felt its weight. Marcus realized that whatever decision he made in the next few moments would shape not just his own future, but the futures of 3 innocent children and one selfless farmer who had already given them everything he had to give. But as he prepared to answer Amma's question, a new complication arrived that none of them had expected. The sound of more vehicles approaching the compound made both men freeze. Through the window, Marcus could see the headlights of several cars pulling up behind his own convoy. Sir, Samuel appeared at the door, his expression grim. We have a problem. The local authorities are here, and they're not alone. Someone tipped them off about your presence, and they've brought social services with them. Marcus felt his blood run cold. After 3 years of searching, after finally finding his grandchildren safe and loved, was he about to lose them again to bureaucracy and red tape? Outside, car doors slammed and official voices could be heard giving orders. Kofi's face went pale as he realized what this meant. In situations like this, children were often removed from their current homes and placed in temporary government custody while lengthy legal proceedings determined their fate. The children, Kofi whispered urgently. They'll take the children. And that's when Marcus Wellington, billionaire businessman and one of the most powerful men in West Africa, made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. Samuel, Marcus said quietly but firmly, get back to the cars and stall them. Tell them I'm conducting a private family matter and that I'll speak with them in the morning through proper legal channels. Sir, they have a court order. I don't care if they have a direct order from the president himself, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had built his business empire. Those children have been through enough trauma for one night. They're not going anywhere until I say they're going anywhere. Samuel hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and headed back outside. Marcus could hear him engaging the officials in conversation, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. Mr. Wellington, Kofi said urgently, if you fight them, they might take the children anyway and make everything worse. Sometimes it's better to cooperate with the authorities. In 3 years of searching for my grandchildren, Mr. Asante, I've learned that sometimes the authorities are the last people who should be trusted with what matters most to you. Marcus's jaw was set in determination. Besides, I have a proposition for you. Before Kofi could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching footsteps made both men turn toward the back room. The children had crept out of bed and were standing in the doorway, their eyes wide with fear as they listened to the official voices outside. Papa Kofi, Kwame whispered, his small hand reaching for the older man's weathered fingers. Are they here to take us away? The terror in the 5-year-old's voice cut through Marcus like a blade. These children had already lost their parents and survived being abandoned once. The thought of them being traumatized again by being torn away from the only stable home they'd known made him physically ill. "No one is taking you anywhere tonight," Marcus said firmly, kneeling down to the children's eye level. "I promise you that." "But you want to take us away too," Amma said, her young voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "We heard you talking. You think we belong with you because you're our grandfather." Marcus felt his heart break a little more at her directness. "Amma, I do believe you belong with family. But I'm beginning to realize that family isn't always about blood. It's about love and care and sacrifice." He glanced up at Kofi. "Your Papa Kofi has shown you more love than many children ever receive from their biological families." The children looked confused but slightly less afraid. Outside, they could hear Samuel's voice rising slightly as the officials became more insistent. "Mr. Wellington," Kofi said quietly, "what was this proposition you mentioned?" Marcus took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against everything he'd been taught about business, about wealth, about the proper order of things. But looking at these three frightened children and the man who had loved them unconditionally, he realized that sometimes the right thing to do had nothing to do with logic or convention. "I want you to come with us," Marcus said simply. "All of you. Together." Kofi stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand. I have a large estate outside Accra. More space than one old man could ever use. The children could have their own rooms, access to the best schools, opportunities one could never have dreamed of at their age." Marcus paused, his voice becoming softer. "But they could also have you. Their Papa Kofi, the man who saved their lives and raised them with love." "You want me to live in your house?" Kofi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to help me raise them," Marcus clarified. "I've been so focused on finding them that I never really considered whether I'd be any good at actually caring for them day to day. I'm 68 years old, Kofi. I built a business empire, but I'm not sure I remember how to build a bedtime story or kiss a scraped knee." The children had been listening intently to this conversation, their young minds trying to process what was being suggested. Finally, little Akojua spoke up with the blunt honesty that only small children possess. "Would Papa Kofi still be our Papa Kofi?" "Always," Marcus said solemnly. "He would always be your Papa Kofi." "And would you be our grandfather?" Amma asked. "I would like to be, if you'll let me learn how." Kwame, ever the protector, stepped forward with his arms crossed. "And we would all stay together? No one would separate us." "No one would separate you," Marcus promised. Outside, Samuel's voice was becoming more strained, and they could hear the officials growing impatient. Time was running out for whatever decision they were going to make. "Papa Kofi," Amma said, tugging on his worn shirt, "what do you think?" Kofi looked down at the three children who had given his life meaning, then up at the wealthy stranger who was offering them a future he could never provide. The decision should have been simple. What was best for the children was clearly to go with their grandfather and have access to opportunities beyond Kofi's wildest dreams. But it wasn't simple, because Kofi had seen what happened to village children who were suddenly transplanted into wealthy city homes. Some thrived, but others lost themselves trying to fit into a world that didn't understand where they came from. These children had roots in the red earth of Akros, connections to the village community, and a sense of identity that had been carefully nurtured over 3 years. "Mr. Wellington," Kofi said slowly, "if I agreed to this arrangement, what would happen to my farm? My life here?" Marcus had been prepared for this question. "You could keep the farm if you wanted. We could hire someone to maintain it, or you could sell it and use the money however you chose. The decision would be entirely yours. And in your house, what would my role be? Would I be a servant? A hired caretaker?" "You would be family," Marcus said without hesitation. "These children's Papa Kofi, and my partner in raising them. Nothing more, nothing less." The sound of raised voices outside grew louder, and Samuel appeared at the door again, his expression urgent. "Sir, I can't hold them much longer. They're threatening to return with additional backup if we don't cooperate immediately." Marcus looked at Kofi and the children, knowing that whatever happened next would determine their futures. "I need an answer," he said gently. For all our sakes. Kofi closed his eyes and felt the weight of responsibility that had been his constant companion for 3 years. These children deserved opportunities, education, and a chance at a life bigger than anything the small village of Akros could offer. But they also deserved stability, love, and connection to their roots. When he opened his eyes, he saw 3 small faces looking up at him with absolute trust. Whatever he decided, they would accept, because they believed Papa Kofi would always do what was best for them. "Children," he said softly, "what do you say? Should we try this adventure together?" Amma reached up and took his hand. "Will you teach us to farm vegetables in the big house's garden? If there's space for a garden, little one. Will you still tell us stories about Anansi the spider at bedtime?" Kwame asked. "Every night, if you want. And will you still make us palm nut soup when we're sad?" Akojua added. Kofi laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd managed since the convoy arrived. "I'll make you palm nut soup whenever you want, sad or happy." The children looked at each other in that way siblings do when they're having a silent conversation. Then Amma nodded decisively. "Okay, Papa Kofi. We'll try the adventure. But if we don't like it, we want to come home." "If you don't like it, we'll come home," Kofi promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how he'd keep that promise if things went wrong. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by terror at the magnitude of what he'd just committed to. He'd gone from being a bachelor billionaire to suddenly being responsible for 3 children and their devoted caretaker, all in the span of a single evening. "Samuel," he called, "tell the officials that the children are coming with their legal guardian voluntarily, and that all proper documentation will be filed through our attorneys first thing in the morning." "Sir, I don't think that's going to satisfy them." "Then remind them that I employ more lawyers than they have officers, and that I'm perfectly willing to turn this into a legal battle that will tie up their courts for the next 5 years if they insist on handling this inappropriately tonight." Samuel grinned despite the tension. He'd worked for Marcus Wellington long enough to know that when his boss made that particular threat, he meant every word of it. As the sounds of negotiation continued outside, Marcus looked around Kofi's simple home and realized there were practical matters to consider. "We should pack some things for the children. Clothes, toys, anything that will help them feel comfortable in a new place." "Most of their things are handmade," Kofi said quietly. "I carved their toys myself, and the village women helped me sew their clothes. Nothing very fancy." "Those are exactly the things they'll need," Marcus said firmly. "The things that remind them of home and the people who love them." As they began gathering the children's few possessions, Amma tugged on Marcus's expensive jacket. "Grandfather Marcus?" "Yes, little one. Are you going to learn to carve toys too?" Marcus looked down at his soft, manicured hands that had never held anything more challenging than a gold pen, and then at Kofi's weathered fingers that had created beautiful, intricate toys from simple pieces of wood. "I don't know, Amma. Do you think I should?" "Papa Kofi says that when you make something with your hands for someone you love, you put a piece of your heart into it. Maybe you should try." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 5 minutes of conversation, this wise little girl had taught him more about love than he'd learned in 68 years of living. "Maybe I should," he agreed softly. But as they prepared to leave the only home the children had ever really known, none of them realized that their biggest challenges still lay ahead. Moving 3 village children and their devoted caretaker into the world of wealth and privilege was about to prove more complicated than any of them had imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, the people responsible for the children's original disappearance were watching and waiting, realizing that Marcus Wellington had just made himself and his newfound family visible targets in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The Wellington estate on the outskirts of Accra was like stepping into a different world entirely. As their convoy of vehicles passed through the massive iron gates and wound up the tree-lined driveway, the children pressed their faces to the windows in wonder. The main house rose before them like something from a fairy tale. 3 stories of gleaming white stone with tall windows that sparkled in the morning sunlight, surrounded by manicured gardens that seemed to stretch on forever. "Papa Kofi," Akojua whispered, her small hand gripping his tightly, "is this really going to be our home?" Kofi himself was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything. The driveway alone was longer than the entire main street of Akros, and he could see fountains, garden pavilions, and what looked like a swimming pool sparkling in the distance. How was a simple farmer supposed to fit into a place like this? "It's certainly big enough for all of us," he managed to say, though his voice carried his own uncertainty. Marcus had been quiet during the 3-hour drive from the village, lost in thought as he watched the children's reactions to leaving their rural home behind. Now, as they approached his estate, he was seeing it through their eyes for the first time. What had always felt like a comfortable home suddenly seemed imposing and cold. "The staff will be curious about you," he said gently as the cars pulled up to the main entrance. "I have a housekeeper named Mary, a cook named Joseph, several gardeners, and security personnel. They're all good people, but they're not used to children being in the house." The massive front doors opened as if by magic, revealing a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. This was Mary J., who had managed the Wellington household for over 20 years and had been like family to Marcus since his wife passed away. "Mr. Wellington," Mary said, her voice carrying both warmth and concern as she took in the unusual sight of her employer arriving with 3 small children and a weathered farmer. "Welcome home. Mary, I'd like you to meet some very special people." Marcus placed a gentle hand on Ama's shoulder. "These are my grandchildren, Ama, Kwame, and Akojua. And this is Kofi Asante, who has been caring for them. They're going to be living with us." Mary's eyebrows rose slightly, but her years of professional service had taught her to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. "Welcome to Wellington House," she said warmly, crouching down to the children's level. "I'm Mary. I take care of this big house, and now I suppose I'll be taking care of all of you too." "Are you like a mama?" little Akojua asked with the directness that had already charmed Marcus. "More like a grandmother who makes sure everyone has clean clothes and good food," Mary replied with a smile. "Would you like me to show you around your new home?" The next hour was a whirlwind of discoveries that left the children speechless with wonder. There were more bedrooms than they could count, a library filled with thousands of books, a game room with a pool table and television screen larger than any they'd ever seen, and bathrooms with fixtures that seemed to be made of gold. But it was the kitchen that truly captured their attention. Joseph, the cook, was a jolly man in his 40s who immediately won them over by letting them help him prepare fresh fruit juice. As the children laughed and chattered with Joseph, Kofi found himself standing awkwardly to one side, unsure of his place in this elaborate household. "This is overwhelming," he said quietly to Marcus. "I don't know how to live like this." "Neither do I most of the time," Marcus admitted. "This house was my wife's dream. She loved entertaining, loved having space for guests and gatherings. After she died, it mostly just felt empty. And now—" Marcus watched Ama trying to reach a mango on the counter while Kwame boosted Akojua up to help her sister. Their laughter echoed through the vast kitchen, bringing a warmth to the space that no amount of expensive furniture had ever achieved. "Now it feels like it has a purpose again," he said softly. Mary approached them with the efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Wellington household for 2 decades. "Sir, I've prepared the children's rooms in the East Wing. 3 bedrooms connected by a common sitting area, so they can be close to each other. And Mr. Asante, I've prepared the guest suite adjacent to the children's area, assuming you'll want to be nearby." "Thank you, Mary. That's perfect. There are, however, some practical matters we need to discuss," Mary continued diplomatically. "The children will need appropriate clothing, school enrollment, medical examinations, and documentation. Also, the security team needs to know how to handle the presence of children on the property." The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd been so focused on finding the children and bringing them home that he hadn't fully considered all the practical details of actually raising them in his world. "One thing at a time," he said, though he felt slightly overwhelmed himself. "Let's get them settled first, then we'll tackle everything else." That evening, after a dinner that featured both Joseph's elaborate roasted chicken and Kofi's simple but delicious palm nut soup, made with ingredients hastily procured from the local market, the children gathered in Ama's new bedroom for their first night in the big house. The room was beautiful, larger than the entire house they'd shared in Acros, with a canopy bed that looked like something from a princess story, built-in bookshelves, and a window seat overlooking the gardens. But as bedtime approached, the children huddled together on the enormous bed, looking small and uncertain in the vast space. "Papa Kofi," Kwame said quietly, Can you tell us the story about Anansi and the wisdom pot? This place is so big and strange. I want to hear something that feels like home. Kofi settled into the window seat, his weathered face gentle in the lamplight. Of course, little one. Let me tell you how Anansi the spider tried to keep all the wisdom in the world for himself. As Kofi's familiar voice filled the room with a beloved folktale, Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, watching this tender scene unfold. The sight of his grandchildren, safe and loved, filled him with a gratitude so profound it took his breath away. But he also felt a pang of sadness, knowing that he was still very much an outsider in their world. After the story ended and the children were tucked into their beds, Marcus walked with Kofi to the guest suite that would be his new home. "The room is beautiful," Kofi said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "More luxurious than anything I ever imagined sleeping in." "But," Marcus prompted, sensing there was more. "But I keep thinking about my little house in Akros. About the sound of roosters crowing at dawn and the smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. About neighbors stopping by to share gossip and check on the children." Kofi sat heavily on the edge of the enormous bed. "How do I help them remember where they came from when everything here is so different?" It was a question that had been troubling Marcus as well. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we need to bring some of their old world into this new one. The gardens here could use some variety. What if we planted a section with the vegetables you grew in Akros? What if we built a small traditional cooking area where you could prepare meals the way you always have?" Kofi's face brightened slightly. "The children would like that. They love helping with planting and harvesting." "Then that's what we'll do. This house is big enough for all of us to live the way we're comfortable living." As Marcus prepared to leave Kofi to rest, the older man called out softly, "Mr. Wellington, Marcus, thank you for letting me stay with them, for understanding that they need more than just wealth and opportunity. They need their Papa Kofi," Marcus said simply. "And honestly, I think I need you too. I have no idea how to be a grandfather." But as both men settled into sleep in their respective rooms, neither of them noticed the figure watching the house from the tree line beyond the garden walls. The children's disappearance 3 years ago had been carefully planned, and their sudden reappearance in the care of one of West Africa's most prominent businessmen had set wheels in motion that would soon threaten the fragile peace they'd all found together. The next morning would bring new challenges that none of them saw coming, and a revelation about the children's past that would change everything they thought they knew about that terrible night by the river. Now, we want to hear from you, our viewers. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let us know what part of the world you're joining us from. We love connecting with our global community. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing African folktales and stories. Share this video with your friends and family. Stories like this are meant to be shared, and we'd love to reach as many people as possible with these powerful tales. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have made the same choice to bring Kofi along, or would you have handled things differently? Let us know in the comments below. 3 weeks had passed since the children's arrival at the Wellington estate, and a comfortable routine was beginning to emerge. The morning started with Kofi teaching the children traditional farming techniques in the vegetable garden that Marcus had created especially for them. The afternoons were filled with lessons from private tutors who came to the house, and evenings belonged to family dinners and storytelling. But on this particular morning, everything was about to change. Marcus was in his study reviewing business reports when Mary knocked urgently on his door. "Sir, there's a detective here to see you." Detective Inspector Grace Mensah from the Criminal Investigation Department. "She says it's about the children." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd begun to relax, thinking that the legal issues surrounding the children's custody had been resolved. His lawyers had filed all the proper paperwork, DNA tests had confirmed his relationship to the children, and social services had approved the arrangements. What could the police possibly want now? "Send her in, Mary. And please ask Kofi to keep the children occupied in the garden until I know what this is about." Detective Inspector Mensah was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s with an air of quiet authority. She entered the study carrying a thick file folder and wearing an expression that Marcus had learned to associate with serious trouble. "Mr. Wellington, thank you for seeing me. I'm investigating a case that I believe involves your grandchildren, and I need to ask you some difficult questions. Of course. Please, sit down. What kind of case? Detective Mensah opened her file and pulled out a series of photographs. 3 years ago, your son David and daughter-in-law Grace died in what appeared to be a tragic car accident on the Kumasi Accra Highway. The children disappeared from the scene and were presumed dead until you found them recently. Yes, that's correct. I've been searching for them ever since. What you may not know, Mr. Wellington, is that we've reopened the investigation into that accident. New evidence suggests it may not have been an accident at all. Marcus felt the room spin slightly around him. What kind of new evidence? Brake fluid was found in the wreckage, but not from your son's vehicle. Someone had deliberately tampered with their brakes, causing them to fail on that dangerous curve. Detective Mensah's voice was steady but grave. We believe your son and daughter-in-law were murdered, and the children were taken from the scene by the perpetrators. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His son hadn't died in a random accident. He'd been killed. And someone had taken the children, probably intending to harm them as well. But why? Marcus's voice came out as barely a whisper. David wasn't involved in anything dangerous. He was a teacher, for God's sake. Grace was a nurse. They lived quiet, simple lives. That's what we're trying to determine. But there's more. Detective Mensah pulled out another photograph, this one showing a man in his 30s with sharp features and cold eyes. Do you recognize this person? Marcus studied the photograph carefully, then shook his head. I've never seen him before. Who is he? His name is Vincent Asidu. He's been in and out of prison for various crimes including kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder. Last week, he was arrested on unrelated charges, and during questioning, he broke down and confessed to being involved in your son's death. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. He confessed. According to his statement, he was hired by someone to make David's death look like an accident and to take the children. He claims he was supposed to deliver them to a specific location, but he lost his nerve when he realized how young they were. Instead of completing his assignment, he abandoned them by the river where Mr. Asante found them. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than anything Marcus had imagined. Someone had wanted his entire family dead, not just David and Grace, but the children too. Who hired him? Marcus demanded. Who wanted my family dead? That's what we're still trying to determine. Asidu claims he only dealt with intermediaries and never met the person who actually ordered the hits. But he did give us some details that might help identify them. Detective Mensah pulled out her notebook. The person who hired him knew intimate details about your son's daily routine, his route to work, even which car he drove. They also knew about the children's schedule and exactly when the family would be traveling that night. This suggests someone close to your family or your business. Marcus felt sick to his stomach as he realized the implications. Someone in his inner circle, someone he trusted, had betrayed his family in the most horrible way imaginable. There's something else, Detective Mensah continued. Since news of your reunion with the children has spread, we've noticed increased surveillance around your estate. Someone has been watching your family very carefully. Surveillance? What kind of surveillance? Professional grade. Expensive equipment. Trained operatives. Whoever originally wanted your grandchildren dead may still want them dead, especially now that they're back in the public eye as your heirs. Marcus's mind raced through the implications. He'd spent 3 years searching for the children, never realizing that finding them might put them in even greater danger than before. What do you recommend? He asked quietly. Enhanced security, first and foremost. And I need to interview everyone who had access to information about your son's family 3 years ago. Business associates, household staff, family friends. Anyone who might have passed information to the perpetrators, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Of course. Whatever you need. I also need to speak with the children, gently of course, to see if they remember anything about that night or the person who took them from the accident scene. Marcus's protective instincts flared. They're only 5 years old, Detective. They've been through enough trauma. I understand your concern, Mr. Wellington, but they may hold the key to identifying who's responsible for their parents' murder. And if that person is still a threat to them, we need to know everything we can. Before Marcus could respond, the study door burst open and Amma ran in, her face bright with excitement. "Grandfather Marcus, Papa Kofi says the tomatoes are ready to pick and we can help make—" She stopped abruptly when she saw the stern-faced woman sitting across from Marcus. "Hello, little one," Detective Mensah said gently, her entire demeanor softening as she addressed the child. "I'm Detective Mensah. I'm here to help keep you and your family safe." Amma looked between the detective and Marcus, her young mind sensing the tension in the room. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Marcus said quickly, getting up to gather her into his arms. "No one's in trouble. Detective Mensah just needs to ask us some questions to help solve a mystery." "What kind of mystery?" Detective Mensah exchanged a look with Marcus, then knelt down to Amma's level. "The kind of mystery that helps us understand what happened to your mama and papa before Mr. Asante found you by the river." Amma's expression grew serious, the way children's faces do when they're trying to remember something important. "The night with the scary man?" Both adults froze. "What scary man, Amma?" Detective Mensah asked gently. "The man who carried us in the dark, after the loud noise and the fire. Mama and Papa were sleeping and wouldn't wake up, and the scary man said he had to take us somewhere safe. But then he got angry and left us by the water." Marcus felt his heart breaking as he realized his granddaughter had witnessed her parents' death and remembered being kidnapped. But Detective Mensah leaned forward with professional interest. "Can you tell me anything else about the scary man, Amma? What did he look like?" "He had mean eyes. And he kept talking to someone on his phone, saying he couldn't do it, that we were too little." Amma's voice became smaller. "He was crying too, just like us." This matched Vincent Asidu's confession perfectly. He'd lost his nerve and couldn't bring himself to harm the children as he'd been hired to do. "Amma," Detective Mensah said very gently, "did the man say anything about who he was talking to on the phone? Any names or anything like that?" Amma scrunched up her face, trying to remember. "He kept saying, 'Please, sir,' and 'I can't do this, sir.' And then he got very angry and threw the phone and said—" She paused, struggling with the memory. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus said softly. "Take your time." He said, "Tell your boss his money isn't worth killing babies. Find someone else to do his dirty work." Amma looked up at the adults with wide, innocent eyes. "What's dirty work?" Detective Mensah and Marcus exchanged significant looks. This was the first concrete evidence they had that there was indeed a boss behind the murders. Someone wealthy enough to hire professional killers but ruthless enough to order the death of innocent children. "Amma," Detective Mensah said carefully, "you've been very brave and very helpful. Is there anything else you remember about that night?" "Kwame saw more than me," Amma said matter-of-factly. "He was awake longer. But he gets scared when people ask about it, so he pretends he doesn't remember." "Where are Kwame and Akojua now?" Detective Mensah asked. "In the garden with Papa Kofi, picking vegetables for lunch." Marcus made a decision. "Detective, I'd like Kofi to be present when you speak with the other children. They trust him completely, and they'll be more comfortable with him there." "Of course. But Mr. Wellington, I need you to understand something. If these children can identify the person behind their parents' murder, and if that person realizes they have those memories, your grandchildren are in very real danger. We need to solve this case quickly, before whoever's watching your estate decides to act." As if summoned by her words, Marcus's head of security appeared at the study door, his face grim. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." The surveillance team spotted someone with a high-powered rifle in the hills overlooking the property. They disappeared before we could apprehend them, but they left this behind. He handed Marcus a small envelope with his name written on it in block letters. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of the children playing in their garden that morning, taken with a telephoto lens from a great distance. On the back, someone had written in red ink, "Some things are better left buried." The message was clear. Someone knew the children were talking to the police, and they wanted the investigation to stop. But Marcus Wellington hadn't become one of Africa's most successful businessmen by backing down from threats, especially when his family was at stake. What he didn't know was that the real mastermind behind his son's murder was someone much closer to home than he could ever imagine, and that person was already planning their next move to silence the children permanently. 2 floors above Marcus's study, in the luxurious guest wing of the Wellington estate, someone was making a very dangerous phone call. The conversation was brief, coded, and conducted in hushed tones that wouldn't carry beyond the thick walls of the elegant bedroom. The children are talking. The police were here today, and they're remembering things they shouldn't remember. The voice on the other end was cold and businesslike. How much do they know? Enough to cause problems. The little girl described a sea-doo perfectly, and she remembered parts of his phone conversation that night. If they keep digging, then we need to accelerate our timeline. The original plan was to wait longer, to let them get comfortable and drop their guard. But circumstances have changed. What do you want me to do? Make it look like an accident. A gas leak, perhaps, or a fire in the children's wing. Something that eliminates the problem without pointing back to us. And the farmer? Asante. Collateral damage. He's become too attached to them anyway. This will actually solve 2 problems at once. The call ended, and the person carefully destroyed the burner phone, grinding it under their heel until it was nothing but plastic fragments and circuit board dust. Then they calmly walked to the window and looked down at the garden where Kofi was teaching the children how to properly water the tomato plants. Soon, all of this would be over, and the Wellington fortune would flow where it had always been intended to go. Meanwhile, in the garden below, Kofi was completely unaware of the danger lurking above. He was focused entirely on Kwame, who had been unusually quiet since Detective Mensah's visit that morning. "Papa Kofi," Kwame said softly as he carefully poured water around a tomato plant, "why do people want to hurt us? We're just children." The question pierced Kofi's heart. How do you explain evil to innocent minds? How do you tell a 5-year-old that there are people in the world who would harm children for money? Sometimes, little one, there are people who make very bad choices because they want things that don't belong to them. But you don't need to worry about that. Your grandfather and I, and all the people who work here, we're going to keep you safe. But what if the scary man comes back? Akojua asked, her small voice trembling. What if he changes his mind about not hurting us? Kofi set down his watering can and gathered all 3 children close to him. Listen to me carefully. The scary man can't hurt you anymore because he's in jail. Detective Mensah told us that. And even if there were other scary people, do you know what we have here that we didn't have by the river that night? The children shook their heads. We have each other, and we have people who love us. Your grandfather has hired special guards to watch the house. Mary makes sure you eat good food to keep you strong. Joseph makes you laugh in the kitchen. And I will never, ever let anyone take you away from this family again. Amma leaned against his weathered chest. Promise, Papa Kofi? I promise, little flower. With all my heart. What Kofi didn't know was that keeping that promise was about to become much more difficult than he could ever imagine. That evening, after the children were asleep and the household had settled into its nightly quiet, Marcus sat in his study with Detective Mensah and his head of security, Robert Owusu. They were reviewing everyone who had access to information about David's family 3 years ago. Let's start with your household staff, Detective Mensah said, consulting her notes. How long have they worked for you? Mary has been with me for 20 years, Joseph for 15. The gardeners and maintenance staff vary, but most have been here for at least 5 years. Robert has handled my security for over a decade. What about business associates? Who knew about your son's schedule and travel plans? Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of suspicion settling over people he'd trusted for years. My business partner, Thomas Kruma, would have had access to that information. My personal assistant, Janet Osei, coordinates family schedules. My lawyers, my accountants. He trailed off, realizing how many people were in his inner circle. We'll need to interview all of them, Detective Mensah said. But I'm particularly interested in anyone who might have financial motivation. Your grandchildren's inheritance would make them very wealthy individuals someday. The bulk of my estate is set up in a trust for them, yes. But there are other beneficiaries as well. Such as... Marcus hesitated, hating himself for what he was about to say. My younger brother, Richard, would inherit a significant portion if something happened to the children. We've had our differences over the years, particularly regarding business decisions. And there's my nephew, Marcus Jr., Richard's son, who always felt he should have been more involved in the family business. Detective Mensah made notes. Anyone else? Thomas Kruma, my business partner, has provisions in our partnership agreement. And there are several charitable organizations that would benefit. Marcus paused. But detective, these are people I've known for decades. I can't believe any of them would. Mr. Wellington, Detective Mensah interrupted gently. In my experience, the people who betray us are almost always the people we trust most. It's the only way they can get close enough to do real damage. Before Marcus could respond, the lights in the study flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. Robert was immediately on his radio. Control room, what's the status on the power outage? Sir, it appears to be localized to the main house only. The security systems are running on backup power, but we're showing some irregularities in the sensor grid. Marcus felt ice water flow through his veins. The children. We need to check on the children. All three of them rushed from the study toward the east wing where the children slept. As they moved through the darkened corridors, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold, the smell of gas. Robert, do you smell that? Gas leak, Robert confirmed grimly, already pulling out his phone to call the emergency services. Everyone needs to evacuate immediately. They reached the children's wing to find Kofi already there, having been awakened by the smell. He had gathered all three children and was leading them toward the main staircase when Marcus intercepted them. Thank God you're all safe, Marcus breathed, pulling them into a fierce embrace. Papa Kofi smelled something bad and came to get us, Amma explained sleepily. He said we needed to leave right away. Very smart, Papa Kofi, Detective Mensah said approvingly. Let's get everyone outside while the fire department checks the building. As they evacuated to the gardens, Marcus's mind was racing. A power outage followed immediately by a gas leak? In a house that had never had either problem before? This was no accident. Detective, he said quietly as they watched the fire department's trucks arrive, this is connected to our investigation. Someone's trying to eliminate the children before they can remember anything else. I agree. Which means our suspect knows we were here today questioning them. This was a message, Mr. Wellington. They're escalating. Sir, Robert approached them with a grim expression. The fire department found the source of the gas leak. Someone deliberately damaged the line feeding the children's wing. This was sabotage. Detective Mensah nodded grimly. Which means our perpetrator is someone with access to the house. Someone who knew exactly where the children slept and how to disable the safety systems. Marcus looked around at his assembled household staff, all of whom had evacuated the building and were standing in worried clusters on the lawn. Somewhere among these familiar faces, people he'd trusted, people he'd considered family, was someone who had tried to murder 3 innocent children tonight. What do we do now? He asked quietly. Now we narrow down our list of suspects very quickly, Detective Mensah replied. Because whoever did this won't give up easily. They'll try again, and next time they might succeed. But as she spoke, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. While everyone else was looking at the house with concern and worry, one person was watching the children with a very different expression entirely. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, but Detective Mensah had been a police officer for 20 years. She knew the difference between concern and calculation. And the person she was watching was definitely calculating something. The question was, would she figure out who it was before they made their next move? Because judging by the boldness of tonight's attack, that next move was coming very soon. As the fire department declared the house safe to re-enter several hours later, Marcus made a decision that would prove to be both wise and dangerous. He was going to set a trap for whoever was trying to hurt his family. But traps, he was about to learn, have a way of catching more than just the intended prey. The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting in his study with only his most trusted associates, or so he thought. Present were Detective Mensah, his head of security Robert, his longtime business partner Thomas Kruma, his personal assistant Janet Osei, and his housekeeper Mary. Kofi sat quietly in the corner, having insisted on being present for any discussion involving the children's safety. "I've asked you all here because someone in my inner circle is trying to kill my grandchildren," Marcus began without preamble. "Last night's gas leak was no accident, and I intend to find out who's responsible." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Marcus studied each face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or deception. "I'm going to share some information with each of you separately," Marcus continued, "and we're going to see what happens as a result. Detective Mensah has agreed to help me set a trap for our saboteur." Thomas Kruma, Marcus's business partner for over 15 years, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Marcus, are you sure this is wise? If there really is someone dangerous in your organization, playing games with them could put the children in even more danger." "The children are already in danger, Thomas. At least this way, we'll know who's threatening them." Over the course of the morning, Marcus met with each person individually, sharing different pieces of false information designed to flush out the traitor. He told Thomas that the children were being moved to a safe house in Kumasi. He informed Janet that they were flying to London for extended protection. He told Mary that they were going to stay with relatives in Cape Coast. Each person was sworn to absolute secrecy and told that their lives depended on keeping the information confidential. But to Detective Mensah, Marcus revealed his real plan. The children weren't going anywhere. Instead, they would remain at the estate under heavy guard while Detective Mensah's team monitored all communications to see who attempted to pass along the false information. What Marcus didn't anticipate was that the traitor was far more clever than he'd imagined. That afternoon, while the household appeared to return to normal routines, a very different scene was playing out in the business district of Accra. In the gleaming offices of Wellington Enterprises, a secret meeting was taking place between two people who had been planning Marcus's downfall for much longer than anyone realized. "The old man suspects something," said the first voice, belonging to someone Marcus trusted implicitly. "He's setting traps, feeding different information to different people." "Then we need to be smarter than his traps," replied the second voice. "What did he tell you?" "That the children are being moved to Kumasi tomorrow morning." "But I don't believe it's true. It's too convenient, too obvious." "You're right to be suspicious. Marcus Wellington didn't build his empire by being naive, and he won't protect his grandchildren by being predictable." The first person leaned forward across the polished conference table. "There's another complication. That farmer, Asante, is more observant than we gave him credit for. He's starting to ask questions about things that happened before he found the children. If he starts connecting dots, then perhaps it's time Mr. Asante had an accident of his own." "And the detective?" "Detective Mensah is a problem, yes. But she's focused on finding external threats. She'll never suspect that the danger is coming from someone who's been part of the Wellington family for decades." Back at the estate, Kofi was indeed asking questions that were making someone very nervous. As he worked in the garden with the children, his sharp farmer's instincts had picked up on inconsistencies in the stories he'd been told about their rescue and the investigation. "Papa Kofi," Amma said as she helped him transplant seedlings, "why did the scary man leave us by the river instead of taking us to the bad person who hired him?" It was a question that had been troubling Kofi as well. "What do you mean, little flower?" "Well, if someone paid him to take us somewhere, why didn't he take us there? Why did he just leave us alone?" Kofi paused in his work, his weathered hands still holding a small tomato plant. Amma's innocent question had highlighted something that didn't make sense. Vincent Asidu had been hired to deliver the children to someone, but instead he'd abandoned them by the river. Why would a professional criminal risk not getting paid unless something had spooked him badly? "Kwame," Kofi said gently, "you've been very quiet about that night. I know it's scary to remember, but can you tell me anything else about what the man said on his phone?" Kwame looked around nervously, then whispered, "He was arguing with someone he was afraid of. Someone who made him very scared. He kept saying, 'But sir, they'll recognize me later.' They're old enough to remember faces. Kofi's blood ran cold. The children had been old enough to identify their kidnapper, which meant they might also be old enough to identify whoever had hired him. That was why someone was still trying to silence them, not just because of what they might remember about that night, but because they might be able to identify the mastermind behind their parents' murder. Did you see anyone else that night, Kwame? Anyone besides the scary man? Kwame nodded slowly. At the place where Mama and Papa were sleeping, before the man took us away, there was someone talking to the scary man. Someone who gave him money and told him what to do. Can you remember anything about that person? They had a nice voice, like someone we knew, and they smelled like the perfume Mama used to wear. A woman. The mastermind was a woman, and someone the family knew well enough for Kwame to recognize her voice and remember her perfume. Kofi felt his heart racing as he realized the implications. There was a woman in Marcus's inner circle who had ordered the death of his son and daughter-in-law, and who was now trying to eliminate the only witnesses who could identify her. "Children," he said as calmly as he could manage, "I need you to go inside and find your grandfather. Tell him Papa Kofi needs to speak with him right away about something very important." As the children ran toward the house, Kofi's mind raced through the women who had access to the Wellington family. Mary the housekeeper, who had been with the family for 20 years. Janet the personal assistant, who coordinated all family activities. Or perhaps someone else entirely, a business associate, a family friend, someone who appeared trustworthy but harbored deadly intentions. But as Kofi stood alone in the garden, he didn't realize that he was being watched. From an upstairs window, someone had observed his conversation with the children and had seen the recognition dawn in his eyes. His questions were getting too close to the truth, and that made him a liability that needed to be eliminated immediately. The watcher picked up a phone and dialed a familiar number. "We have a problem. The farmer knows too much, and he's about to share it with Marcus. You need to stop him before he reaches the house." "How do you suggest I do that?" "I don't care how you do it. Just make sure he doesn't make it to that meeting alive." As Kofi hurried toward the main house, his mind focused on sharing his discoveries with Marcus and Detective Mensah. He had no idea that someone was already moving to intercept him. The peaceful gardens of the Wellington estate were about to become the scene of a desperate struggle between a simple farmer trying to protect the children he loved and a killer who would stop at nothing to keep their identity secret. And somewhere in the house, 3 innocent children were about to learn that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. Kofi never made it to the main house. As he hurried along the stone pathway that connected the gardens to the rear entrance, a figure stepped out from behind one of the large baobab trees that dotted the estate grounds. In the afternoon sunlight, the person looked completely ordinary, even familiar. Someone Kofi had seen around the house countless times over the past 3 weeks. "Mr. Asante," the voice called out pleasantly, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Kofi slowed his pace, his farmer's instincts suddenly alert. Something felt wrong about this encounter, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "I'm actually on my way to see Mr. Wellington about something urgent," Kofi replied politely. "Perhaps we could talk later?" "I'm afraid this can't wait." The pleasant tone had shifted slightly, becoming more commanding. "You see, I know what you figured out, and I can't let you share it with anyone." Kofi's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. This was the person who had tried to kill the children last night. This was someone who had been living among them, eating at their table, pretending to care about their welfare while planning their destruction. "It was you," Kofi said quietly, his weathered hands clenching into fists. "You killed David and Grace, and you've been trying to kill the children." "David was weak," came the cold response. "He had no head for business, no vision for what the Wellington Empire could become. He would have run it into the ground within a decade, and those children would have inherited nothing but debt and failure." "So you decided to murder them all for money?" "I decided to save the family fortune from being destroyed by sentiment and poor judgment. Marcus is old. He won't live forever. When he's gone, the business should go to someone who understands how to build wealth, not give it away to charity cases and failed social programs." Kofi started to back away, hoping to reach the house before this confrontation escalated further. But his adversary was ready for that, pulling a small pistol from beneath their jacket. "I really am sorry it's come to this, Mr. Asante. You seem like a genuinely good man, and you've taken excellent care of the children. But you've learned too much, and they remember too much. This ends today." "People will ask questions if I die," Kofi said, still backing slowly toward the house. "Marcus will know something's wrong. You're going to have a heart attack, brought on by the stress of recent events. Very sad, but not uncommon for a man your age who's been under tremendous pressure. The children will be devastated, of course, but they'll recover. And then, tragically, they'll have their own accident in a few weeks. Perhaps a drowning in the swimming pool. Children can be so careless around water." Kofi realized with growing horror that this person had thought through every detail. They weren't acting in desperation. This was a carefully planned execution that would look like natural causes and accidents. "The children are in the house right now, telling Marcus what they remembered," Kofi said, trying to buy time. "Even if you kill me, it's too late. He already knows. Actually, he doesn't. I intercepted the children before they could reach him. I told them you'd changed your mind and wanted them to wait in the garden shed while you finished some work. They're there now, locked inside, waiting for their Papa Kofi to come get them." The casual cruelty of using the children's trust against them made Kofi see red. This monster had manipulated innocent children who had already suffered so much trauma. "You won't get away with this," Kofi growled, his protective instincts overriding his fear. "Even if you kill all of us, Detective Mensah will keep investigating. She'll find the truth. Detective Mensah will find exactly what I want her to find. Evidence pointing to my partner as the mastermind, along with a suicide note confessing everything. Very convenient how guilty consciences can drive people to take their own lives." Kofi's mind raced as he realized the scope of the conspiracy. There were two people involved, and this one was planning to eliminate both their partner and all the witnesses, leaving themselves as the sole beneficiary of the Wellington fortune. But as they spoke, neither of them noticed the small figure creeping along the hedge line toward the garden shed. Amma had grown suspicious when the adult had told them to wait in the shed, remembering Papa Kofi's warnings about strangers who tried to separate them from their family. She had slipped out through a loose board in the back of the shed and was now trying to reach the house to get help. Meanwhile, in his study, Marcus was growing concerned about Kofi's delay. The children had delivered the message that Papa Kofi needed to see him urgently, but that had been 20 minutes ago. It shouldn't take that long to walk from the garden to the house. "Robert," Marcus called to his head of security, "could you check on Kofi? The children said he needed to speak with me, but he hasn't arrived yet." "Of course, sir. I'll radio the perimeter guards and see if they've spotted him." But as Robert began coordinating the search, Detective Mensah's sharp eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. Through the study window, she could see two figures near the baobab tree, and one of them was holding what looked suspiciously like a weapon. "Mr. Wellington," she said quietly, drawing her service pistol, "I need you to call for immediate backup and get somewhere safe. I believe your trap worked, but not in the way we expected." Back in the garden, Kofi was running out of time and options. His attacker was getting impatient, finger tightening on the trigger of the small pistol. "Any last words, Mr. Asante?" "Yes," Kofi said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Those children have been through enough pain for one lifetime. Whatever happens to me, please don't hurt them. They're innocent. Innocence is a luxury that the Wellington heirs can't afford." The gunshot rang out across the peaceful gardens of the estate, sending birds scattering from the trees and shattering the afternoon quiet. But as the echo faded, it wasn't Kofi who was falling to the ground. Detective Mensah's aim had been true, and 20 years of police training had prepared her for exactly this moment. The would-be killer lay writhing on the ground, their weapons spinning away across the stone pathway. "Grace Mensah, Criminal Investigation Department," the detective announced as she approached with her weapons still drawn. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and the murders of David and Grace Wellington." But as she secured the scene and called for medical assistance, Detective Mensah realized they still didn't know the identity of the second conspirator, the partner who was supposed to be framed for everything. Somewhere in the Wellington household, there was another killer who would soon realize their plan had failed spectacularly. And that person, facing exposure and arrest, might decide that if they couldn't have the Wellington fortune, No one could. The children were still locked in the garden shed, unaware that their world was about to change forever. Marcus was still in his study, not yet knowing that one of his most trusted associates had just tried to murder the man who had saved his grandchildren's lives. And somewhere in the house, a phone was ringing with news that would drive the second conspirator to make one final, desperate attempt to destroy everything Marcus Wellington held dear. The story that had begun with a poor farmer finding 3 lost children by a river was about to reach its most dangerous moment yet. But sometimes, it's in our darkest hours that we discover just how strong the bonds of love and family really are. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone you trusted completely showed their true colors? Sometimes the people we think we know best are hiding secrets that could shatter our world. What would you do if you discovered someone in your inner circle had been plotting against your family? And how far would you go to protect the people you love most? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this story with your friends and family. Tales like this remind us of the power of love, courage, and the lengths good people will go to protect the innocent. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss the thrilling conclusion of this incredible story. The phone call came exactly 18 minutes after the gunshot echoed across the Wellington estate. In the elegant sitting room of the main house, someone answered on the first ring, already knowing what the news would be. "It's done," they said quietly into the phone, assuming their partner had succeeded in eliminating both Kofi and the children. But instead of confirmation, the voice on the other end was panicked and desperate. "Nothing is done. That detective shot me, and they're arresting me right now. You need to get out of there immediately." The phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the marble floor of the sitting room. Through the tall windows, the sound of sirens could be heard approaching the estate. Police backup was arriving, and soon the house would be swarming with officers conducting a full investigation. There was only one option left: eliminate all the witnesses before the police could secure the scene and extract the full truth. Meanwhile, in the garden shed where the children were trapped, little Amma had managed to squeeze through the loose board and was running as fast as her small legs could carry her toward the main house. She could hear sirens in the distance and had seen strangers with guns near the baobab tree. All she knew was that Papa Kofi was in trouble and she needed to find grandfather Marcus immediately. Inside the house, Marcus was coordinating with Robert to secure the property when Amma burst through the back door, tears streaming down her face. "Grandfather Marcus!" she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "Papa Kofi is in danger. The bad person has him, and Kwame and Akojua are trapped in the shed." Marcus felt his heart stop. "What bad person, Amma? Who trapped you in the shed?" "The person who smells like Mama's perfume," Amma sobbed. "The one with the nice voice who told us to wait while Papa Kofi finished his work. But Papa Kofi never came, and then we heard the loud noise like thunder." Marcus's blood turned to ice as he realized what Amma was telling him. The second conspirator was still in the house, still among them, and had just made a move against his grandchildren. "Robert!" Marcus shouted. "Get a team to the garden shed immediately. 2 children are trapped there. And I want every person in this house accounted for right now." As Robert coordinated the rescue of Kwame and Akojua, Marcus tried to think through who could be the second conspirator. Someone the children trusted, someone with access to the house, someone who wore expensive perfume and had a voice they recognized. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Janet Osei, his personal assistant for over 8 years, had been like family to him. She coordinated all of David's schedules, knew the family's routines intimately, and had been one of the first people to welcome the children when they arrived at the estate. She was intelligent, organized, and had always seemed devoted to the Wellington family's interests. She was also the beneficiary of a substantial life insurance policy that Marcus had set up for all his key employees, and she knew the details of his will and the children's trust fund better than almost anyone. "Where's Janet?" Marcus demanded as Robert returned with reports on the other household staff. "I haven't seen her since the shooting, sir. She was in the sitting room making calls about 30 minutes ago, but she's not there now." Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. If Janet was the second conspirator, she was desperate and cornered, which made her extremely dangerous. And she knew the house better than anyone except Marcus himself. "Find her," Marcus ordered. "And when you do, treat her as armed and extremely dangerous." But Janet Osei was already 3 steps ahead of them. She had spent 8 years learning every secret passage, every hidden stairway, every blind spot in the Wellington estate security system. While Robert's men were searching the obvious locations, she was moving through the house like a ghost, making her way toward the family wing where she knew she could do the most damage. In her mind, the plan was simple. If she couldn't inherit the Wellington fortune legitimately, she would make sure no one else could either. A few strategically placed incendiary devices would turn the historic mansion into an inferno, eliminating all the witnesses and destroying all the evidence. In the chaos and confusion of the fire, she could slip away and disappear forever with the contents of several offshore accounts she had been secretly funding over the years. But first, she had to make sure there were no survivors to tell the authorities what really happened. As she crept through the servants' corridors toward the main staircase, Janet could hear the sounds of the search intensifying. Police officers were now throughout the house, coordinating with Robert's security team to establish a perimeter and conduct room-by-room searches. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone but was actually a sophisticated remote detonator. Over the past several months, she had been placing small explosive devices in key locations throughout the house, disguised as routine maintenance work and security upgrades. With the push of a button, she could bring down the entire east wing where the children slept. But as she prepared to activate the device, a soft voice stopped her cold. "Janet, please don't do this." She turned to find Marcus standing at the end of the corridor. His hands raised in a non-threatening gesture, but his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. "You were like family to me," Marcus said quietly. "I trusted you with everything. How could you do this to David? To those innocent children?" Janet's face twisted with years of suppressed resentment. "Family? I was your employee, Marcus. A very well-paid employee, but never family. Family gets inheritance. Family gets respect. Family doesn't get told to fetch coffee and arrange your dry cleaning for 8 years while watching you prepare to hand over billions of dollars to 3 children who don't even know your real name. The children are 5 years old, Janet. They're innocent babies who lost their parents." "The children are obstacles," Janet replied coldly, her finger hovering over the detonator. "Just like David was an obstacle. Just like Grace was an obstacle. Just like that simple farmer who asked too many questions." Marcus realized with growing horror that Janet truly believed she was justified in her actions. In her mind, she had worked for the Wellington fortune and deserved to inherit it more than anyone else. "If you activate that device, you'll kill everyone in this house," Marcus said desperately. "Mary, Joseph, Robert, the police officers, people who've never done anything but serve this family faithfully." "Collateral damage," Janet said with chilling indifference. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good." But as her finger moved toward the activation button, neither Janet nor Marcus noticed the small figure creeping up the stairs behind them. Amma had slipped away from the police officers who were supposed to be keeping her safe, determined to find her grandfather and make sure he was protected from the bad person with a nice voice. When she saw Janet holding the strange device and heard the cold words about sacrifices and collateral damage, Amma's 5-year-old mind understood one thing perfectly clearly. This was the person who had hurt Papa Kofi and wanted to hurt their whole family. With the fearless courage that only children possess when protecting the people they love most, Amma launched herself at Janet's legs, wrapping her small arms around the woman's knees and holding on with all her strength. "Don't hurt my grandfather," Amma screamed with all the power her small lungs could muster. "Don't hurt my family." The unexpected tackle sent Janet stumbling backward, her finger accidentally hitting the detonation button as she fought to maintain her balance. But instead of the massive explosion she had planned, there was only a series of small pops and hissing sounds from various parts of the house. "What?" Janet looked at the detonator in confusion. Marcus smiled grimly. "Did you really think I became one of Africa's most successful businessmen by trusting people blindly, Janet? We've known about your little devices for weeks. Detective Mensah had our bomb disposal team replace all your explosives with harmless pyrotechnics 2 days ago." Janet's face went white as she realized she had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Her partner had been arrested, her weapons were useless, and she was trapped in a house full of police officers with nowhere to run. But cornered animals are often the most dangerous, and Janet Osei had one final card to play. She pulled a small pistol from her jacket and pointed it directly at little Amma, who was still clinging to her legs. Maybe I can't burn down the house, Janet said with deadly calm, but I can still eliminate the most important witness. One way or another, Marcus, your precious grandchildren will not live to inherit your fortune. The standoff that followed would determine whether love and family could triumph over greed and betrayal, or whether Marcus Wellington's greatest joy would become his most devastating loss. Time seemed to freeze in the elegant corridor of the Wellington estate as Janet's pistol remained trained on little Amma's head. The child, still wrapped around Janet's legs, looked up at her grandfather with complete trust, even in this moment of ultimate danger. Papa Kofi always says that love is stronger than fear, Amma said in her small, clear voice. He says that's why he could never hurt us, even when we were scared and crying by the river. Janet's hand trembled slightly at the child's innocent words, but her resolve remained firm. Love doesn't pay the bills, little girl. Love doesn't build empires or secure futures. But love saved us, Amma replied with the simple wisdom that only children possess. Papa Kofi loved us when we had nothing. Grandfather Marcus loved us even before he found us. And we love each other, which makes us strong. Marcus felt his heart breaking as he watched his granddaughter's courage in the face of mortal danger. This 5-year-old child, who had already survived the murder of her parents and 3 years of uncertainty, was now facing down a killer with nothing but faith in the power of love. Janet, Marcus said softly, look at her. Really look at her. She's just a baby who's been through more trauma than most adults could survive. How can you point a weapon at someone so innocent? Innocence is a luxury I can't afford to indulge, Janet replied, though her voice carried less certainty than before. She's seen too much, remembers too much. They all have. What she remembers is being loved and protected, Marcus said. What she remembers is kindness from a simple farmer who gave up everything to keep her and her siblings safe. What she remembers is that there are good people in the world who will sacrifice anything to protect children. As he spoke, Marcus noticed movement at the far end of the corridor. Detective Mensah and her team were positioning themselves for a potential shot, but with Amma so close to Janet, any attempt to disarm her would put the child at terrible risk. But then another voice joined the conversation, coming from the main staircase behind Marcus. Janet, please. Put down the gun. Everyone turned to see Kofi Asante climbing the stairs slowly, his shirt torn and dusty from his encounter in the garden, but his eyes filled with the same gentle strength that had made him the children's beloved Papa Kofi. You should be dead, Janet said, her voice filled with shock and dismay. Detective Mensah is a very good shot, Kofi replied calmly. Your partner is alive too, by the way, though he'll be spending the rest of his life in prison. Just as you will be, if you surrender now. I won't go to prison, Janet declared, her grip tightening on the pistol. I've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to end up in a cell. Kofi continued his slow approach, his weathered hands visible and non-threatening. You're right that you've worked hard, Janet. I've seen you these past weeks, managing Mr. Wellington's schedule, coordinating the household, taking care of countless details. You are very capable and intelligent. Janet blinked in surprise at the unexpected praise. But you forgot something important, Kofi continued gently. You forgot that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds. True wealth is measured in the number of people who love you and whom you love in return. He gestured toward Amma, who was still clinging to Janet's legs with stubborn courage. This little girl has more wealth than most billionaires, because she is rich in love. She has a grandfather who searched for 3 years to find her. She has siblings who would do anything to protect her. And she has a Papa Kofi who will always put her welfare above his own. Sentimental nonsense, Janet said, though her voice wavered slightly. Is it? Kofi asked. Look around you, Janet. Where are the people who love you? Where are the friends who would risk their lives to save you? Where is your family? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, Janet seemed to truly consider what her choices had cost her. In her relentless pursuit of financial wealth, she had destroyed every relationship that might have brought her genuine happiness. I don't need anyone, she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Everyone needs someone, Kofi said softly, now close enough that he could see tears forming in Janet's eyes. Even you, Janet. Even now, it's not too late to choose love over money, family over fortune. "It is too late," Janet whispered. "I've done terrible things. I've hurt innocent people. I've killed." "You've made bad choices," Kofi agreed. "But you haven't killed anyone yet today. David and Grace's blood is on Vincent Asidu's hands, not yours. You can still choose to be better than the person you've been." Little Amma, sensing the shift in Janet's mood, looked up at her with those wide, trusting eyes that had melted so many hearts over the past weeks. "Are you sad?" Amma asked with genuine concern. "Papa Kofi says that when people are mean, it's usually because they're sad inside. Are you sad because you don't have a family who loves you?" The innocent question broke something inside Janet's hardened heart. She looked down at this beautiful child whom she had been preparing to kill, this little girl who was showing her compassion even in the face of mortal danger. "I am sad," Janet whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I am so very, very sad." "Then maybe," Amma said with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years, "you should put down the scary thing and let us love you instead. Love makes the sadness go away." For a moment that lasted an eternity, Janet stared down at the child whose life hung in the balance of her next decision. Around her, she could hear the gentle breathing of people who were prepared to die to protect this innocent little girl. Marcus, who would gladly trade his fortune for his granddaughter's safety. Kofi, who had already proven he would sacrifice everything for these children. Detective Mensa and her officers, who had sworn to serve and protect the innocent. And suddenly, Janet understood what she had been missing all these years. The true treasure of the Wellington family wasn't their money or their property. It was their capacity to love unconditionally and to inspire that love in others. With a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Janet slowly lowered the pistol and let it fall to the marble floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered as Amma immediately wrapped her small arms around Janet's waist in a comforting hug. "I'm so sorry." Detective Mensa and her team moved quickly to secure the weapon and take Janet into custody, but they did so gently, recognizing that this was a woman who had finally realized the magnitude of what she had almost lost. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Janet looked at Marcus with eyes full of regret. "I really did love working for your family, Marcus. I lost my way." "I know," Marcus said sadly. "And I'm sorry we didn't see your pain in time to help you." In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Janet's betrayal came to light through the investigation and trial. She had been embezzling small amounts from Wellington Enterprises for years, using the money to fund offshore accounts and plan her eventual takeover of the company. When David's growing interest in the family business threatened to expose her activities, she had made the desperate decision to eliminate him and his family. But the children's disappearance and Marcus's relentless search had disrupted her plans, forcing her to wait and watch for 3 years while living in constant fear of discovery. Janet was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Her partner, Vincent Asidu, received a similar sentence for his role in David and Grace's deaths. But perhaps most importantly, the truth was finally revealed, and the children could begin to heal from their trauma with the knowledge that the people responsible had been brought to justice. The Wellington estate gradually returned to its peaceful routine, but with significant changes. Marcus had learned the value of family over fortune and spent his remaining years focused on being the grandfather he had never had the chance to be to his son. The children thrived under the combined care of their wealthy grandfather and their beloved Papa Kofi, growing up with both privilege and humility, both opportunity and wisdom. Kofi's vegetable garden became the heart of the estate, a place where the children learned the value of hard work, patience, and nurturing growth. Marcus learned to carve wooden toys under Kofi's patient instruction, creating treasured memories with hands that had once only known the softness of luxury. And every evening, as the sun set over the gardens of their beautiful home, the family would gather for dinner and stories, celebrating not the wealth they possessed but the love they shared. Amma, Kwame, and Akojua grew up knowing they were blessed not because they were rich, but because they were loved by people who would sacrifice everything to keep them safe. They learned that true treasure cannot be stolen, cannot be lost in market crashes, and cannot be destroyed by those who would do them harm. They learned that sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what you inherit, but from the family you choose and the love you give freely to others. And in the small village of Akros, where 3 children had once been found crying by a river, the people still tell stories of Papa Kofi, the humble farmer whose love was strong enough to save not just 3 lost children, but an entire family that had forgotten what really mattered most. The story of the poor farmer who discovered triplets and changed their lives forever became a reminder that sometimes our greatest treasures come disguised as our greatest responsibilities, and that the bonds of love we choose to create are often stronger than the bonds of blood we inherit. In the end, Marcus Wellington's greatest fortune was not the billions in his bank account, but the wisdom of a simple farmer who taught him that the richest people in the world are those who are rich in love.